Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. My name is Dr. Mason Porter, and I'm an epidemiologist, a specialist in studying how diseases spread and how to stop them before they transform entire populations. For the last decade, I dedicated myself to finding solutions for some of the world's most persistent illnesses. When the rumor of a new, potentially deadly pathogen began circulating in the global health community, I leaped at the chance to contribute. But I never imagined that my greatest ambition would lead to what is now being called the worst public health disaster in history. In my quest to create a groundbreaking vaccine, I unknowingly set the stage for the zombie outbreak that is devouring our civilization. I remember the day I was approached by a powerful organization with deep pockets, an institution that claimed they wanted to sponsor my laboratory. They had government contacts, advanced technology, and more money than I had ever seen in one place. Their representatives wore suits that looked too expensive for their own good, and they spoke with unwavering confidence. When they visited my lab, I noticed they didn't seem shocked by any of the advanced immunology equipment or the genetically tailored diagnostic machines. Instead, they seemed reassured by it, as if everything they saw lined up perfectly with their secret plans. They told me their top priority was to combat a rare hemorrhagic disease that had been causing isolated incidents in remote regions. Initially, I saw nothing suspicious about it. After all, new pathogens do sometimes emerge in the far corners of the world, especially in areas with poor healthcare infrastructure. The organization promised me funding to pursue any research angle I believed would lead to a breakthrough. This offer seemed like a dream come true. Unlimited resources to hunt down elusive diseases and protect humanity from unknown threats. I started working around the clock, pulling data from remote field stations, analyzing blood samples from afflicted patients, and running test after test in a secure environment. The early results hinted that we were dealing with a strange virus, something that behaved differently from more common illnesses. It exhibited an uncanny resilience, capable of mutating if subjected to harsh conditions. Yet I believed that with my advanced methods, I could keep this virus contained and manipulate it into a form suitable for creating an effective vaccine. That was my first mistake: arrogance. As my team and I worked, we noticed unusual properties. The virus rapidly attacked human cells, but instead of just destroying them, it seemed to alter them. At first, we chalked this up to a quirk of our in vitro experiments. But after some time, we realized the changes were more extreme than any typical virus we had studied before. In certain laboratory simulations, infected cells displayed signals that indicated a hyperstimulated neurological response. They were firing off electrical impulses at odd intervals, almost as if they were operating under a frenzy. We didn't comprehend the implications fully, but I insisted that with sufficient genetic engineering, we could weaken those harmful traits and still harness the body's immune response to build our vaccine. It took months of painstaking work, but finally, we developed a prototype that seemed promising. Our test results on lab animals were encouraging. The vaccine triggered a significant immune response without causing severe side effects. The organization funding us pushed us to accelerate human trials. Normally, there would be a slow, meticulous process: animal tests, small-scale human trials, pilot programs under strict supervision, before a full rollout. However, we were rushed into a more aggressive timetable. I was uneasy, but my ambition overrode my caution. I wanted to be the first to eradicate a dangerous pathogen and protect vulnerable populations from a looming threat. So we moved forward with a carefully selected group of volunteers. These were people who had signed up for our study with the promise of modest compensation and a chance to be part of groundbreaking research. Among them was a man named Benjamin Lewis, someone who would later be called Patient Zero. He was a kind, unassuming individual who joked that he had never even caught a cold before. His immune system, he said, was ironclad. Benjamin's initial screenings showed no abnormalities, and he seemed like a perfect candidate. The first few weeks went by without major problems. We monitored all participants closely, watching for signs of fever, rash, or any other unpleasant symptoms that could suggest the vaccine was unsafe. Benjamin reported mild fatigue, headaches, and occasional nightmares. I didn't think much of it. Clinical trials often cause minor side effects, and we had no reason to believe anything was seriously wrong. Then everything went very wrong, very quickly. One afternoon, Benjamin missed his appointment. We tried calling, but no one answered. Eventually, we sent a research assistant to his apartment, only to find that it was empty. His phone was left on a table, still plugged in. Food on the counter had gone bad. It was like he had vanished in the middle of the night. My instincts told me something terrible had happened, but there was no proof that his disappearance was connected to the vaccine. I asked the organization for help in locating him, but they just told me not to worry. They assured me they had resources on it. 2 days later, I got an email from a hospital in another city. Benjamin had shown up in the emergency department, disoriented and behaving erratically. The staff couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. In his more lucid moments, he kept muttering something about nightmares, about hearing voices that demanded he feed a growing hunger. That was the first mention of what I can only describe now as the earliest symptoms of the zombie virus. I drove to that hospital immediately. Once I arrived, I found Benjamin in a sealed observation room. They told me his condition had deteriorated rapidly. His skin was clammy, and his eyes were bloodshot. He was trembling uncontrollably, covered in sweat. Yet, the strangest part was his heart rate. Instead of being dangerously high, it sometimes slowed to a rhythm so faint that the monitor beeped warnings. At other times, it would spike well past normal. He seemed to teeter between life and some new stage that resembled neither living nor deceased. While I was there, he had a violent outburst. He lunged at a nurse, teeth bared, and tried to clamp down on her arm. It took 3 people to wrestle him away. I saw the raw fear in the nurse's eyes, and it was at that moment I realized we weren't dealing with an ordinary infection. This virus had mutated inside him. The vaccine, intended to protect against a hemorrhagic disease, had triggered something else, something horrifying. I urged hospital staff to keep him in quarantine, to let me run further tests. They agreed initially, but the next morning, Benjamin vanished again. A security camera caught him staggering down a corridor, leaving a trail of smeared fluid on the floor, making a guttural sound that haunted my dreams for weeks. No one had seen him slip past the final set of doors. It was as if he dissolved into the night. Over the next few weeks, sporadic reports emerged of attacks in surrounding areas. People were bitten on the streets. Some victims didn't survive, and those who did began showing symptoms similar to Benjamin's. Their eyes gained a dull, glassy look. Their skin grew cold to the touch. The infected developed an unrelenting urge to bite and spread their condition. Local news stations mentioned aggression and mysterious infections, but never used the word zombies. No one wanted to believe that a zombie virus could be real. Even I refused to accept it, at least, not until I saw it with my own eyes. Soon the alarm bells grew louder. More hospitals reported unusual cases of frantic behavior, more bites, and more unexplained transformations. The organization that funded me insisted it was all under control. They told me to keep quiet, to stay in my lab and solve the problem, as if the problem were just another puzzle. But the infected were multiplying. We had a full-scale zombie outbreak on our hands, and I knew in my heart that my vaccine had played a role in unleashing it. I made it my mission to find a cure, or at least some form of containment. I set up a small secret lab of my own, away from prying eyes. I brought in a couple of my most trusted colleagues, the ones who shared my dread and guilt, but also my unwavering dedication to fixing this. We took samples from newly infected individuals, some so far gone they barely resembled the people they had been before. Their eyes were empty, yet they responded viciously to any movement. We had to keep them behind reinforced partitions just to stay safe. In the lab, they behaved like caged animals, groaning and clawing at the glass. Day after day, I worked with cultures of the virus, searching for a weakness. Each time the virus adapted to my attempts to neutralize it. It was maddening. I was racing against a relentless biological monster that seemed to relish every challenge I threw at it. The only glimmer of hope I found was that the progression of symptoms varied widely, hinting that some people might possess a partial immunity, or at least a slower path to becoming fully zombified. If I could find that key, maybe I could produce an antidote. Time, however, was not on our side. The zombie outbreak spread faster than we anticipated. Cities fell into chaos. Entire neighborhoods were declared quarantine zones, cut off from the outside world in the hope of containing the infected. The news channels, at first calm and disbelieving, exploded with urgent bulletins. Yet, even as everything spiraled, official statements used vague language like pandemic, public health emergency, or aggressive infection. They refused to label it as a zombie virus until it was too late. I recall the first time I saw a city block overrun. I was in a helicopter, courtesy of the same organization that started this all, being flown to a secure facility. Below us, the roads were choked with abandoned cars, and clusters of people were running in terror as these half-limping, half-sprinting infected roamed the streets. Smoke rose from burning buildings. Sirens wailed in the distance. Those still uninfected tried to form makeshift barricades, but none of it seemed enough. The undead pressed forward relentlessly, as if guided by a single horrifying instinct. The secure facility was nothing more than a secret bunker under an unmarked building. The people who took me there seemed more concerned about militarizing the virus rather than stopping it. They asked me pointed questions about its potential for biological warfare. That was when I finally realized the organization's real motive. They had set me on this path, knowing that if we discovered a vaccine that could be weaponized, it would be of immense strategic value. In my blind desire to help people, I had become a pawn in a much larger game. I escaped the bunker the first chance I got, horrified and determined to bring the truth to light. I made copies of my research, storing them in hidden locations, hoping that someone, somewhere, could use my data to reverse the damage. But my revelations were met with skepticism, and later aggressive silence. The mainstream media was under strict orders to downplay any suggestion that this had been manufactured. They wanted people to assume it was just a natural mutation that had taken everyone by surprise. Meanwhile, the zombie virus continued to spread. Official estimates put the number of infected in the millions, but I suspected it was far higher. Entire regions went dark as infrastructure collapsed. Military units tried to establish safe zones, but rumors circulated that even some of those had been overrun. Society was fracturing into pockets of desperate survivors. I wandered from one temporary lab to another, continuing my research in abandoned clinics, using scavenged equipment. I used protective suits whenever I had to capture new samples, though I was never sure if it was enough. The virus had grown stronger, seemingly capable of surviving in environments that would have killed any other pathogen. Some people claimed it was airborne, but I never found conclusive proof of that. Still, the notion that it could spread more easily filled me with dread. For a time, I traveled with a small group of survivors who had heard rumors of my work and believed I could help. They brought me infected tissue samples, risking their safety for a chance that we might end the zombie outbreak. Each morning, we would barricade ourselves in whatever shelter we found, listening to the moans and shuffling of zombies outside. At night, we took turns keeping watch, terrified that we could be discovered by wandering hordes of the infected. Despite the fear and the bleakness, there were fleeting moments of hope. One night, I treated a man in his early 30s who had been bitten on the forearm. We cleansed the wound and administered a hastily prepared cocktail of antiviral agents. In what seemed like a small miracle, he showed delayed progression of the infection. His transformation, which normally might have taken hours, was slowed to a crawl. We all saw that as a sign that maybe we were getting somewhere. That hope was crushed when, a few days later, he collapsed in front of us. His eyes lost their human spark. He had become yet another animated husk, stumbling around with that disturbing, jerky gait, searching hungrily for a victim. I still see his face in my nightmares, that momentary look of terror as he realized what was happening to him. Then, the emptiness, the vacant stare, and the unstoppable drive to spread the zombie virus. The group I was with disbanded soon after, each member too grief-stricken or too fearful to carry on in one place. Some sought out rumored safe havens in the mountains, others headed to what remained of fortified cities. I continued alone, haunted by guilt, but compelled to keep searching for a solution. Every new infected sample I found gave me a slight edge, a new clue in unraveling the virus's genetic code. During my travels, I stumbled upon a remote laboratory hidden in a cluster of dense woods. It looked abandoned from the outside, but inside, I found signs of recent activity. Cabinets were stocked with advanced reagents, and computers displayed partial datasets about the infected. I realized I wasn't the only one studying this horror. Someone else had been here, someone who was systematically analyzing the zombie virus and its rapid mutations. On a back table, I discovered documents referencing Project Vantage. The language was cold and methodical, describing not just a vaccine, but also potential uses for enhanced aggression in controlled subjects. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Project Vantage must have been the organization's real objective. I scanned the pages, my eyes jumping from line to line, each revelation more unsettling than the last. They detailed how the vaccine could be manipulated to create strong, compliant individuals who could be directed for specific tasks. But something went catastrophically wrong. Instead of targeted aggression, we ended up with a virus that consumed its hosts, turning them into these restless, staggering zombies. I spent weeks in that hidden lab, poring over every scrap of information. By combining my notes with what I found, I managed to piece together a more comprehensive picture of the zombie outbreak. The virus had a structural component I had never seen before, a prion-like element that targeted the nervous system. This discovery explained the bizarre neurological frenzy in the infected, and it became apparent that the vaccine, meant to stimulate an immune response, had instead facilitated a hyperactive transformation once the virus adapted to the host's body. Finally, I was close to a potential breakthrough. If I could isolate the prion-like proteins and figure out how to neutralize them, I might be able to craft an antidote. I locked myself in the lab, ignoring the howling winds outside, the distant moans of roaming zombies, and the creeping feeling that I might be tracked down. For days on end, I tested compound after compound, searching for a molecule that could bind to these proteins and render them harmless. I sometimes forgot to eat or sleep, consumed by the desperation to rectify the tragedy I had unleashed. After countless trials, I reached a partial success. I engineered a serum that, in theory, could halt the progression of the infection if administered early enough. It wouldn't reverse the damage in those who had fully turned, but it might save someone at the earliest stages. Elated, I tested it in vitro with promising results. The next crucial step was a live test. I was terrified of capturing an infected subject, but I had no choice. If I wanted to verify the serum's effectiveness, I needed a living infected host in the earliest phase of transformation. On a cold, grey morning, I set out from the lab, armed with a tranquilizing device and protective gear. My heart pounded as I crept through the deserted streets of a nearby small town. Signs of desperation were everywhere. Boarded-up windows, vehicles abandoned in the middle of the road, and personal belongings scattered in what looked like the remnants of a frantic flight. I eventually found someone who was still conscious, but clearly in the early stages of infection. An older individual huddled against a wall, breathing shallowly and cradling a bite wound on their shoulder. Their eyes flitted open, revealing that telltale redness. They moaned weakly, and I approached cautiously. I administered a mild tranquilizer, enough to render them docile but not unconscious. Then I gently placed them on a makeshift stretcher and returned to the lab, praying that I was making the right choice. Once there, I stabilized them and injected the experimental serum. For the next 48 hours, I barely moved from their side, monitoring vital signs and recording every minor fluctuation. Astonishingly, the progression halted. The individual's fever subsided, and while they were still very weak, they spoke coherent words. Tears filled my eyes. I thought I had done it. I thought I had finally found a solution that could save at least some people from the zombie virus. On the third day, however, everything spiraled out of control. The individual awakened with a fierce tremor, their muscles twitching uncontrollably. The monitors indicated a rapid heart rate and erratic brain activity. I tried sedatives, but nothing worked. Before my eyes, they let out a strangled cry and collapsed. In minutes, the transformation resumed, this time even more violently. Within an hour, they were gone, replaced by the same blank-eyed stare I had seen too many times before. In one horrifying moment, they lunged at me, snapping their teeth against the reinforced glass barrier I had the foresight to install. Once again, my hope for a cure evaporated. Distraught, I realized that I might only be delaying the inevitable. The prion-like proteins had latched onto the nervous system too deeply, and while my serum postponed the changes, it didn't eliminate them. That same day, I decided it was time to leave that lab. The environment was compromised. The infected subject's escape attempt had alerted others wandering nearby. I couldn't afford to stay in a place that was no longer secure. I packed up my notes, documenting every failure and minor success. Leaving the hidden lab was an immense emotional blow. That place had been my best chance at reversing the zombie outbreak, and despite all my efforts, I had failed to find a permanent solution. I walked out into a world that had grown even more silent, shadowed by a sense that things were approaching a grim finality. I moved on, heading south, searching for any hub of survivors who might benefit from the knowledge I had gathered. Along the way, I came across makeshift camps, some of which had been overrun by the infected. At other times, I managed to trade small pieces of data or first aid support for supplies. Though I had no definitive cure, I still carried advanced medical knowledge that could help with injuries and secondary infections that were rampant in these unsanitary conditions. Weeks turned into months. The global scope of the zombie virus was undeniable. Rumors suggested that major cities worldwide had been devastated. Some people whispered that entire countries were teetering on the edge of collapse. Meanwhile, I felt like a ghost, drifting through the aftermath of my own biggest mistake. Every time I saw a shuffling figure or heard the frantic cries of someone being attacked, I was reminded of the part I had played in this living nightmare. I began searching for any radio transmissions from official sources, hoping there might be a final stand or a hidden stronghold where the last of humanity could regroup. Occasionally, I caught faint broadcasts from shortwave radios, fragments of coded messages, pleas for help, or brief signals indicating someone was still alive out there. I tried to respond, but too often my transmissions went unanswered. One day, by pure luck, I stumbled onto a stronger radio signal. A calm, measured voice announced that a small group of scientists was gathering in a decommissioned research facility near the coast. This group claimed to have found partial countermeasures for the zombie virus. My heart raced at the possibility. I decided to take the risk and travel there. Perhaps together, we could piece together the final puzzle. Maybe this was the redemption I had been seeking. The journey took days, each one more perilous than the last. The roads were unsafe, with random packs of the infected roaming, drawn to any sound. I traveled mostly at dawn, when visibility was good enough to spot lurking figures, but still early enough that the infected seemed less active. Through a combination of caution and luck, I managed to avoid direct confrontations. When I finally arrived at the coordinates, the facility looked half intact. I saw silhouettes in the watchtowers, a handful of figures patrolling behind tall, makeshift walls. They let me in once I identified myself as a scientist. Inside, I discovered a small community of survivors, doctors, technicians, a few security personnel, and even some families seeking shelter. They had established a rudimentary lab in the lower levels of the facility. Generators provided intermittent power. Everyone worked together to keep the place running, each day uncertain but fueled by hope that knowledge might overcome this nightmare. I introduced myself and handed over my research. For the first time since the zombie outbreak began, I felt something close to relief. The lead scientist, an older man with sharp eyes, told me they had a fresh angle on the virus, focusing on the neurological aspect. They believed that a specialized antiviral might target the virus's replication in the spinal fluid before it reached the brain. We spent long hours talking shop, exchanging data, debating hypotheses. They told me about their own heartbreaks, times when they almost had the solution, only to watch it slip away at the last moment. Yet, as exhausting as it was, it felt empowering to be around others who hadn't given up. In the following weeks, I contributed all my experience to refine their approach. We ran experiments on tissue samples, carefully guarded in locked chambers to prevent accidents. Each morning, we gathered to review any progress. It was painstaking work, often discouraging, but at least we had each other. Then, as if fate enjoyed toying with us, we began to notice signs that something wasn't right in the facility. Supplies went missing. A soldier on night patrol disappeared without a trace. Strange noises echoed in the corridors. Some of us suspected the infected had found a way in. Others worried that a saboteur might be among us, acting on behalf of the same group that had initially funded my research. Suspicion hung in the air, a silent tension thick enough to taste. One night, an alarm blared throughout the compound. Security lights flashed red, and a voice over the intercom warned of multiple breaches at the perimeter. I raced to the control room, heart pounding, to find monitors showing the infected swarming through a damaged section of fencing. They moved in disorganized clusters, drawn by the commotion. I knew from grim experience that it wouldn't take long for them to pick up the scent of living people. The entire facility was in imminent danger of being overrun. Panic spread. Families huddled in corners, while security forces tried to seal off the lower levels. Scientists rushed to salvage critical research data, uncertain if we would ever have another chance. Amid the chaos, I gathered as many of my notes and prototypes as I could carry. I wanted to stay and help defend the facility, but I was urged to leave, to protect the only remaining hope for a cure. My colleagues insisted that the best chance for humanity's survival depended on preserving our work. In the confusion, I found myself racing down hidden service tunnels, guided by an emergency plan the lead scientist had shown me. The echoes of conflict reverberated above, people shouting, the infected wailing, metal doors slamming. I tried not to think about what was happening behind me. It felt like running away, but I also knew that if I stayed and fell victim, everything we had discovered would be lost. The data I carried might be the only path left to contain the zombie virus. Eventually, I emerged into a dimly lit escape route leading into thick woods. My breath was ragged, and my mind was clouded with dread. In my backpack were hard drives, notebooks, and a few vials of experimental compounds that could, in theory, be the seed of an eventual solution. I paused for a moment, hearing distant screams and the persistent drone of alarms. My entire body was shaking, and tears threatened to blur my vision. I don't know what became of the others in the facility. Did they manage to seal off the breach? Were they overwhelmed by the infected? Or was there truly a saboteur among them, ensuring that our efforts would fail? All I know is that I was forced to leave behind the closest thing I had found to redemption. Now, I wander once more, alone with my burden of guilt and responsibility, uncertain of my next steps. Yet there's a spark of determination that refuses to die in me. If there is even the slimmest chance that the knowledge I carry can end this zombie outbreak, or at least slow it down, I have to keep going. Somewhere out there might be another enclave of scientists or survivors who can push this research to the finish line. Perhaps I'll discover better equipment or more advanced labs hidden away. Or maybe I'll find a broadcast, a clue, or an indication that a cure is already within reach. I have no illusions about the danger ahead. The zombie apocalypse has consumed much of civilization, and the infected are everywhere. But I can't give up. Not when I was the one who unleashed this threat in the first place. I walk through silent towns, picking my path carefully. I scavenge for food and medical supplies, always ready to run or hide at the first sign of danger. Everywhere I look, I see the remnants of what we once had. Empty schools, deserted homes, broken sidewalks. It tears at my heart, but it also strengthens my resolve. As I continue onward, I remind myself that I am still a scientist at heart. My mind is my greatest weapon against the virus, and I won't rest until I've done everything in my power to stop it. Maybe in the next laboratory I find, the next secure zone, or the next group of survivors, I'll finally succeed. And if I fail again, I will still keep trying. I owe the world that much. I have a final message for anyone who might read these words. If you come across any facility or encampment that's working on a cure, please share these notes. Guard them with your life. The data includes genetic sequences, protein inhibitors, and everything else we've discovered so far about the zombie virus. It may not be a guaranteed solution, but it's the closest thing we have. I beg you, don't let this knowledge vanish. Every day, more people join the ranks of the infected, turning the horizon into a sea of wandering figures. Yet somewhere, hidden among the ruins, a spark of hope might remain. I refuse to believe that this is truly the end of our story. Humanity has always fought back against impossible odds. Maybe, just maybe, we can do it again. I don't know if I'll be the one to find that final piece of the puzzle, but I promise I won't stop looking. Even now, as the sun sets over an abandoned skyline and the low moans of zombies echo through the desolate streets, I feel a flicker of possibility. The next sunrise could be our last, or it could be the dawn of a new era where we finally reclaim our world from the zombie virus. I can't tell which future awaits, but I will keep moving forward until my body fails me or the infected close in. Perhaps I'll reach that rumored bastion of safety or stumble onto a hidden lab brimming with potential discoveries. And if you're out there, reading this, remember, the fate of humanity may hinge on what happens next. My name is Dr. Mason Porter, and I carry the blueprint for a second chance, if such a thing still exists. Somewhere beyond these empty streets, beyond the restless hordes, and beyond the mistakes we made, I believe there is a future waiting to be claimed. All we need is one breakthrough. But as I stand on the brink of this new journey, a quiet truth tugs at my thoughts. Sometimes, tragedies cannot be reversed. Sometimes, all you can do is stand against the tide, hoping your determination can outlast the chaos. Whether our efforts will be enough, whether there is a way to undo what I set in motion with that ill-fated vaccine trial, remains to be seen. The future is unwritten, and so I walk into the twilight, burdened by guilt yet driven by hope, knowing that we may stand on the edge of a final outcome, one that might spell the end of our species or the beginning of our renewal. Only time will tell. Thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse.